Uranus, Saturn, aspects that have been happening since 1988, which started with a conjunction, and in the last decade or so, it's been mostly the tension of the squares between these two different planets, or gods, rather. I'm going to go a little over, I'm going to define each plane or planet or god so that we have a context for going through these ideas. And I'm going to start with Saturn. So Saturn, as we know, as many people have heard, Saturn has like a shadow that it casts over reality because it creates the form by which we live. So we're used to the symbols of Saturn being boxes, like boxing in reality, solidifying reality. Saturn is associated with the Saturn return that we all have at about 27, 28. And then we have our second Saturn return, 58, 59. And this is, and every 7 years, there's a Saturn cycle where whatever hasn't worked, what hasn't fully come into form, is torn down and destroyed. And then there's a new form that gets to be developed. And Saturn's very slow to develop, to mold things into physical seeming reality on this third density. And so that happens in our individuated lives, but it happens as well on a mass level. And with the discovery of Uranus 300 to 400 years ago, we have a god that we can't see that's behind Saturn, and it has its own muse of chaos. It has its own way of bringing new things into reality. And so there is already a tension between these two different gods and these two different planes and planets. And we're experiencing that tension through our own lives and through our lives together right now during the end of this Kali Yuga cycle, in the sense that order and chaos are coming to a head and clashing and creating something anew on many levels. New boxes, old boxes are being torn down. New manifestations of perceiving reality, perceiving our kind of temporal frame of reality, almost to a sense where we're losing, it feels like we're losing some sense of our temporal reality as new temporal resets occur and new perceptions of time occur as our spirits are able to see in time. And I like to talk about that sometimes through that our spirit or our soul can see in milliseconds, as opposed to our everyday physical eyes, which is see in seconds. So I'm not going to say anymore. Went a little too far there, describing our reality as some kind of Philip K. Dick novel, as is sometimes noted. So I'm going to let Molly go a little deeper into some of that.
Thanks, great intro, Mario. I just want to include some of the more recent dates. So that square tension was exact 3 different times of 2021. And that was where most of us were experiencing, obviously, some of the effects of lockdown, pandemic, this idea of hypervigilance, this notion that maybe freedom has to be sacrificed for conservation. So these are common kind of contradictory elements that these two planets face, especially when in a hard aspect of a square, and other kind of themes that emerge during the square, which this year, 2022, it'll be close to exact in September, October, 1 degree, but it's never going to go exact. And I also want to mention that from mid-March to July, it's actually out of orb. So we might not feel it as strongly, but it doesn't mean that we're completely through with this square. But some of the themes are sudden economic and financial disruptions. There can be things that are quite shocking and require innovation and adaptation. So things that we've experienced in the past are like revolutions, protests, civil unrest, technological breakthroughs and advancements, and also political, social breakthroughs to create a new order, and then the gaining of rights or freedom, and sometimes the loss of rights or freedom. We can see these two energies kind of get muddled. So I just want to provide a little bit of historical context. Obviously, every cycle is new and different, so it won't play out exactly the same way, but we definitely see patterns emerge. So on that financial disruption piece during the square. There was a square during the 1929 Great Depression, stock market crash, which then kind of was followed up with 1933, the New Deal, and it's in Germany, the Third Reich, and we all kind of know how that went down. And then there's some other examples I have during the Civil War, when the Confederate States were wanting freedom from the Union to maintain what was their systemically oppressive ways. So something to point out with this square is that there might be aims that are like offering or kind of saying they're for the reason of freedom, when really they are designed to just keep a further form of oppression. So it's a little sneaky in that way, and it's something to really observe with this square, is that things that might seem necessary in the moment or a solution in the moment might have repercussions later down the line that aren't necessarily better. And that's what this cycle kind of brings us through. I heard an astrologer describe it as solutions that come about, but then create problems later down the line that need new solutions. So a way to think of that in the science and technology sector would be like, for instance, we have these breakthroughs of like 5G technology, and we have a lot of things that might seem convenient and helpful, or we're thinking of very interesting ways to try to save our planet. Like they're talking about taking carbon and putting it into the oceans, and these very kind of like ways of remediating things from climate change, but we don't necessarily know what the repercussions that will have later down the line, or like the meat that they're growing in laboratories. So there's like band-aids sometimes being put on old problems, but they might be creating new implications that we need to be aware of later down the line. Let me just see if there's a few other little highlights of history with the square. So there was also, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just said, sure, go ahead. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of different interesting manifestations, as you noted, of not knowing what the chaos is versus the order, because it's switching places and it's morphing all the time. So we don't know exactly what's coming into existence, what it really is and what it really means. We might have a perceived idea, but we don't know how it's going to affect us.
Right. So it requires adaptability, and I think a good level of discernment and being kind of balanced between these two extremes, if you will, as in any square aspect. So the 1974 78 square was the Cambodia Khmer Rouge Socialist Revolution that obviously was a very devastating effect. And then we have another square, and this was with the Saturn-Pluto opposition back in 2001 with the World Trade Center incident that led to that heightened idea of being aware of terrorism and this war on terrorism. That obviously many astrologers talk about created a lot of restrictions for the safety, which is something that we see a lot playing out with this square. And those are kind of just some very like prominent, very historical moments. And it's not too, obviously those are kind of shocking events to share about, but it's ultimately so we know that this hard aspect is a crisis in action, as what Dane Rudyard would call squares. And it's something that cyclically happens, and the awareness that we have, we can hopefully bring out the more positive manifestations of working with these energies. And sometimes things might be, they might seem restrictive, and then ultimately there's something good comes out of it, like with the pandemic where people were locked down and they had to pare down some things and make some lifestyle reassessments, and then maybe hey, they could spend more time with their families and they could work from home. So it's not
create
all
great projects, great art, you know what I mean, or write a novel, or spend more time on their music and like expand their careers or their aims in some other way,
Right. It's sometimes it shows us this square that restriction, right, is ultimately a harbinger for creativity and innovation.
Yes, well said.
Yeah.
It's I'll just add real quick that what Molly's talking about is the embodiment of these Saturnian and Uranian forces by different collective groups or individuals. So when, as Molly noted, there's a lot of war during these times where we have a square, where we have that tension between these two gods, these two planets. And so there's ultimately an embodiment of force for each one. One takes on the kind of channeling or possession of one of the planets, and the other one takes on the other. And this causes this tension where one side is trying to just be safe and to protect itself, and maybe another side is using chaos as its muse and is attempting some kind of agenda to rearrange reality. So this is happening on all levels. And as Molly described it, introduction to this in a way was this locking down of our reality, this like going inward, this forcing us in our houses to look at things. And that was also an embodiment for us of this Saturnian kind of regress, so that we can reassess what our visions really are, and almost like bring our Uranian visions into it. It was a really powerful experience in that way for many, I think. But just I add that so we don't forget that we're always embodying these forces, and ultimately it's attention that is always moving and shifting and changing. And so fear will cause us to jump into a Saturn box or create a Saturn box so that we can control reality, because we're too scared of the pain or the fear that could come about through chaos. But as one of my favorite comic book writers noted a long time ago, do not fear chaos, employ it. I think it was something to that degree. Yeah, do not fear chaos, employ it as I do, something like that. Go ahead.
Cool. And I, on a more like not on a social level, but on a more, I guess, what's the word, geological level, it doesn't take too much imagination to think about Uranus in Taurus and Uranus squaring Saturn, of what that means on an Earth-based level of Earth changes. We actually had that last year, during the peak of this square, the La Palma eruption occurred. And so, yeah, this notion of things coming to like a head, and that's, you know, obviously played out on a societal level, but then also an earth change level. But with that awareness, we can just learn to be more adaptable in ways, and be smarter about how we navigate, knowing that those energies are around.
Yeah, and just a note, like right as Molly already mentioned, right now is a period where things are kind of molding and melding and a little calmer. But attention will arise again in September and October. And I think a couple times some of the, I think actually the eclipses at the end of spring in May and April are actually going to square Saturn, and maybe even oppose Uranus or conjunct Uranus. Like there's some more, there is some added tension in the spring, but it won't be as intense as in the fall, when we're actually dealing with the square coming to another head, you know, and bringing up more and more conflicts, because you know there's new densities of reality being put into place. We all know that we're looking at a possible economic, you know, transition to a digital economy. I mean, that's just what's happening, and blockchain technology and all kinds of other strange technologies that we don't even want to go into, which are attempting to compete with Saturn and our fixed perception of reality. I mean, look at all the online, you know, what do they call it? You know, the multiple kind of reality stuff, you know, all the meta reality stuff. I mean, that's all competition with Saturn. That's all kind of Uranus immorally bringing in its chaotic manifestations, possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about too with this square, ancient future, those kinds of themes emerge.
Interesting.
I know, I remember it was last year. I think it was last year. I saw this article about these fossilized, I believe they were some sort of an insect or mollusk or something in a park in Arizona that they thought that had been extinct, or they thought they were extinct, and they basically were coming back to life. They were like a microscopic or a really small organism, and it was like, yeah, they had this like resurgence. So discoveries like that are really interesting and make me think of
Interesting.
more kind of inspiring aspects of this square. And I also think about yeah, just the way with Uranus and Taurus, the way that we're finding biological solutions to problems, like we're using natural things like mushrooms to solve maybe things like over pollution of plastics, like finding the mushrooms that will eat plastics, innovations like that. So I think a lot of really strong science can come up with things. And then an interesting thing I think we observe with this is like there's amazing science, but then maybe the Saturn needs to catch up to the science, like the laws need to catch up. Or like, did you see that article of in China, they have artificial wombs, where it's like, okay, on one hand, interesting science, but then can the ethics, if you will, the Saturn, the limits catch up to this crazy Uranian? Because we tend to think of
Yeah.
Uranus as like, oh, it's just great, it's innovation, but sometimes there's a shadow side to that innovation.
Uranus doesn't have any moral qualms. It's going to bring in what it does. It's bringing it from every direction, in a permutation. And so Saturnian kind of grounding and boxing up is what is exactly, it's playing catch up. And I wonder, to look at our shifting, changing densities of reality as if Uranus is almost taking over sometimes, because our Saturnian way is an old way of perceiving reality. It's a very hard and fast and judgmental and kind of calcified and brittle, seeming structure that is actually not that fixed. When we look at reality, when we look deeper into, especially if you like meditate with your eyes open, like you can see all the shifts and changes to your perceptions, and then it goes deeper and deeper. But yeah, I wanna share, if I may, and then I'll come back to you because I know you wanna offer some solutions, some more direct solutions. I want to share a major theme that's been occurring with this Uranus square Saturn, and it's interesting to observe it because it's such an old thematic. It's almost like Molly's describing. It's like something ancient and old that's erecting itself back up out of the earth, almost like a stone tablet. If we think back to like biblical times and the idea of, the Ten Commandments, like on some kind of stone, kind of pushing out the earth right now, because what has made a huge resurgence, and especially because with all the locking down of what occurred, there was also a tension between people who were very Uranus based. In other words, who naturally embodied the Uranus energy. And so they felt it as more of a constriction, more as a shutdown of their own ability to experience their outer world. I mean, we know that opened up the inner world, but at the same time, like, does that not lie within our own choice, was the question that was kind of put forth. And so we have many getting into natural law and common law, and many attempting to um, just kind of respond to things in a way where we're questioning and we're saying, no, I don't agree with that, whether it's in relationship to our jobs or the schools we're going to or the stores we're going to. A lot of us have taken up this learning where we're actually, and I'm not a lawyer at all, I should say that, but I'm definitely into the ideas of natural law and the implementation of that in a larger sense, where we are, as I mentioned in some other videos, with the transitions of Jupiter, especially our own law and our own and the laws around us, dictated by the governments and how that's shifting and changing. So is ours. So many are coming into this sense where they're feeling a need to declare their own sovereignty. And I first saw this on Lada Leon's website. She had her declaration of sovereignty like clear on her website, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And since then, many have followed suit. And we seem to be living in a time where we're now declaring our own law. And while it may be ignored continuously, and many are arguing and saying that common law and natural law doesn't work at all. You're not coming to any solutions. Well, of course it works. It's Uranus. You're bringing in the chaos of not just agreeing. You're actually saying, no, I don't agree with that. No, that's not going to happen. No, I'm going to hold you accountable. Like I'm going to write up this affidavit and you refute this, and you take and you show me how what you're saying is true, is real, is law. Like show me, give me the evidence. Not trying to prove anything, but just asking questions.
It's classic Uranian trickster energy is how I think of that.
Yeah. Well,
and using rules for freedom.
Yeah, right. Because what am I doing but attempting, almost deceptively seeming to check if the wall is actually solid? Oh, is this really a law? Well, show me. Let me read it. Let me see what it's about. Let me understand it. Let's contract. Let's talk about it. Let's make some agreements. Let's compromise. I can do this, you can do that. But the old Saturnian, stronghold doesn't want to compromise, doesn't want to, it just ignores. And so a lot of people are getting a lot of that, and people are claiming it doesn't work, but it works. Like it works because you're creating a new reality for yourself. You're actually defending your new law. And you're holding strong to it.
I love that. I hadn't thought about it in that way until chatting about this transit.
I know it all comes out. It's such a major theme of the transit because all the tension is occurring between us individuals and our governments and new manifestations of reality confronting old manifestations. And it's all old versus past, as you noted initially in our conversation. It's all like an old versus past schematic, and we're becoming anew for it. Adversity creates growth. Without adversity, we don't grow.
Totally. I think of it like I was reflecting on the square as like feeling like growth spurts. The growing pains, the pain you feel when the bones are trying to stretch. And then what we get from that, as you said, is adaptability and flexibility and solutions.
Yeah. And you have some. You want to share those with us?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, on a more physical level, obviously, this is going to really vary how deeply people feel this. As Mario really beautifully pointed out, people might fall on either side, or might perceive this square in a different way than someone else because you might be on the more Saturnine thing of.
You for a second, Molly. You want to repeat that one more time? Like your voice went out for some reason.
Yeah, I noticed that too. The grid was disrupted during this conversation.
I don't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, it's going to be so personal how people perceive and feel this transit, depending on kind of your perspective of things. A way to look at how it's going to affect you more personally or in a more physical way, because I'm very fascinated with the study of medical astrology, is looking at where are the planets in your chart, what house are they in your chart specifically. And I like to offer some ideas for plants to work with, because I think of knowing astrology, the whole point is so we can ground it into our bodies and our physicality. I also am not like a medical doctor, so any herbs I bring up, it's for the correspondences and where I think they could be allies as plants consumed as tea. But of course, always consult with someone before you try new herbs. But the first kind of class of herbs I think of for this tension of Saturn Uranus is anything that's going to really soothe the nervous system. So that's the nervine herbs. And these herbs are known to, it's a big classification of herbs, so there's so many that fall under that, but I'll touch on a few. These are herbs that are known to really regulate the nervous system, help with sleep and wake cycles, help relax the body, and also deal with depression. So on a two-part way, they can help with both depression and anxiety, which are kind of extreme manifestations of Saturn and Uranus energy. Yeah. So yeah, So having teas, like one tea I really enjoy and I put into a lot of my blends is linden flower, which is um, was very revered by the Germans, and sometimes it's known as the lime tree. Um, by the British, they call it the lime tree, even though it's a misnomer. It's not a lime fruiting tree, but it is a flower that is a nervine. It can help with calming the nervous system down, and it was also seen as a very like protective herb. It was seen to be a tree of Freya in that lore, and she being this giver of life, and it was kind of a tree of peace. And so I think in these very tumultuous times too, like anything that has like a kind of protective and peaceful presence can just help us tap into that in ourselves individually. Another herb that I think can be really cool is a nervine as well. And also, this herb is more of like a moistening water type plant. When we think of Saturn and Uranus on a medical perspective, they're both drying planets. Uranus is obviously very air elemental, and it wasn't classified in traditional medical astrology because they didn't know about it. Saturn, on the other hand, was classified as more cold and dry. So together, I feel like it's a very drying combination. And so anything that's going to be demulcent, meaning it like moistens and soothes. And demulcents can also have qualities that are an expectorant, meaning they can help us like cough up things. I'm actually getting over some iteration of some virus now. And yeah, it's helpful to know that some of these nervines aren't just nervines, but they can help us with our respiratory system. So one such is um, marshmallow root is an herb that I really like. It's a nervine, but it also helps with the respiratory system, breathing, and
Yeah.
it can soothe your stomach as well, which we know the gut-brain connection. So it's good for both anxiety and kind of like depressive episodes or tendencies, and moistening kind of water representing plants. And then the other one I was really thinking of is the lotus, sacred lotus, specifically blue lotus. I'm most familiar with working with. There's red and white lotus, but this plant is really ties into these two planetary energetics, I think, because lotus, not only is it a nervine and it's very relaxing and very peaceful, kind of beautiful plant representing purity, beauty, love. It's seen to represent the past, present, and future because it has blossoms, seeds, and and the blossoms, the seeds, and the buds can occur like simultaneously on this plant. So they see it as a representation of a coherence of past, present, and future. So I think it kind of ties into some of the themes that have emerged with this conversation. So yeah, those are just some herbs I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll just nuance that a bit. The nervous system. I mean, our nervous systems are being jolted with all these, multiple new introduction of realities into our lives. And so just remember to get a lot of rest. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with all types of waves and electronic pollution all the time. And that affects our nervous system. I mean, it amps it up. So these herbs that Molly are talking about, like these are good for like 7, 8 o'clock, even 10 or 9 o'clock, depending what time you go to sleep or you feel like you need a second kind of move. Those are usually times to actually take a break and relax your nervous system, because otherwise sometimes some people just go into like a full force at nighttime, which is not always, sometimes it's fine because some of us are like that. But yeah, taking breaks, because our nervous systems, there's so much information, so many neutrinos pouring through our nervous system, from the planets all the time, especially now with Uranus changing reality, changing technology, just coming into us. And so I just big advocate for taking care of yourself and taking a lot of time for breaks and to feeling rested and then getting back to what you were doing.
One other little note is I talked about these kind of water corresponding plants, but literal water, salt water, particularly, but any water. I take a lot of baths. I think water is so cool to bring in because it's nourishing all the earth energy happening, and it's also uh, helping us combat, if you will, some of the intensity of the electromagnetics. So water isn't a conductor of electricity. So in a way, I think of it as kind of like an antidote to too much air. So when you get in the water, like I feel personally, if I take a bath, I feel like I'm like soaking the internet out of me. That's how I feel. If I go swimming, it's like I feel so free of that kind of hectic ampy energy that sometimes you might feel, that buzziness you might feel if you've been like holding a phone for too long or sitting by your computer for too long, etc.
I think you said it. Water is probably the most important element of this time, and make time to be around the ocean, around the rivers, in the rivers, in the lakes. Like make that time because there's something about the waters, the knowledge that the waters carry and what they can transmit to us by just being present with them and listening. Yeah, it's very powerful, you know. So, anything else? Are we good?
I just want to end on like one little note to say that the end of this cycle is, so when it'll be a conjunction again will be, I think, around 2032. And just to note, like some of the last conjunctions of Saturn Uranus, like one really big moment was the collapse of the Berlin Wall. So knowing that even though we're in the thick of like 3/4 through this cycle, that these are cycles and we get through them, and there's solutions, and sometimes there's more issues, but then there's more solutions. So I think, as astrology always reminds us, it's an ongoing dance, and the more we're aware of them, the less kind of power or control they have over us.
And then I'll just a last note to this because this has been an interesting theme I've been observing is when I see these tensions between the planets, like especially the Jupiter Saturn, 2021 conjunction or 2020 rather. I look at it now as who's going to emerge as the dominant force.
The
I mean,
square.
well, I was thinking initially of the Jupiter Saturn conjunction.
Oh, got you. Jupiter, sorry.
That's a 20-year process. So when I was thinking of that one, I was thinking, well, who's going to win that battle, Jupiter or Saturn, right? And now with this Saturn Uranus force, I'm looking at the same thing. Who's going to win this battle? And I don't mean it like there has to be someone victorious or some planet or force victorious, but there's emerging in a sense a new way, a new vision, a new beingness. And so it's just interesting to watch if because I thought Saturn would be the victor of the Jupiter Saturn, and now I'm thinking with the Uranus Saturn that Uranus would be the victor. But it's just interesting to watch because these are cycles that are interweaving with each other, and forming.
Mm,
So it's not that simple.
correct. It's not that simple. And then, yeah, I think you can look at maybe who's one way to perceive who's winning might be from an astrological perspective, look at who's more dignified, like who's in a more comfortable position in the sky, because that's always shifting as well.
Neptune and Pisces.
Yeah, Neptune and Pisces is winning.
What we're dealing with right now. Probably the strongest force. All right, so thanks everyone. We really appreciate, and we'll be doing some more of these vids in the future, some more interviews. If you caught our last interview with Crystal Time and some other stuff, and we'll continue to do also intro aspect videos for astrology as well as human design for beginners and such.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Bye.